I used BSPWM for quite a while, and as you would expect, it sort of became ingrained in the way my workflow actually functions. So when I swapped over to AwesomeWM, it was kind of difficult to get myself back to the point where I felt comfortable in the window manager. It's not to say that Awesome is bad, but it's just a very different experience from the way that BSPWM works. And while some things could be adapted over to work inside of Awesome, other things had to be completely reimagined from the ground up to actually fit inside of this window manager, and one of those things is the way I do layouts now. Now, BSPWM's layout is mainly going to be spiraling, but Awesome also has a spiraling mode as well. They have some distinctions though, so I think the way to separate them is that BSPWM does local spiraling, whereas Awesome does global spiraling. So what I mean by this is, let's say we have this window here, and this window here. Now, as you saw, regardless of which window I was actually focused on, it put the new window in the exact same space and moved the spiral in the exact same way. But inside of Awesome, if I was focused on, say, this window right here, and I made a new window, it would actually go and make a new spiral from that position. So Awesome spiraling is going to be far more consistent. You always know where the new window is going to go, but I genuinely hate it. I couldn't stand the spiraling inside of Awesome. I only have it here for the sake of the video. So normally, I'm going to have a master stack. Typically, having 5 windows open like this, I try to avoid, and having 4 windows here with a single master node, I also avoid as well. So if I'm going to have a single master, it's always going to be 3 windows per desktop. Anything more than that goes on another desktop. Now, as I said there, if I only have 1 master node, if I say have 2 master nodes, then adding another window in here basically gives me a grid layout, and this can be used for having things like my stream layout open. Occasionally, you'll also see me using variants of master stack as well, where I have the master node on the right-hand side. Now, I typically just use this for my secondary monitor because I want to have what I'm mainly focusing on as close to my main monitor as possible, so I don't have to turn my head that much. I also rarely, but I still have them here just in case I need them, have a top master node and a bottom master node. Usually I don't use these unless I'm trying to see something really wide, but that's not something I do too often. This layout is kind of useless for editing things like configs, and that's going to be much easier if we have a really tall master node. There are other layouts that come with AwesomeWM, like a spiral in a different direction and having all of the windows on the current desktop floating, but I don't really see much of a use case for those, and I just basically remove them from my config. But speaking of floating windows, I have no qualms actually using them. I just tend to use them fairly sparingly. For example, if I want to bring up my notes suddenly, having this be floating is kind of useful, so I can just jot something down. It doesn't really disturb anything else I have here, and when I'm done with it, I can go and close it, and we're all good. There are a few others like that, but I don't ever use my system like you'll see on a certain subreddit about posting pretty desktop pictures where everything is floating and you're not even using a tiling window manager anymore. I like tiling, and that's the way I typically work. Since I switched to Awesome, something I've been taking heavy advantage of is window rules. So window rules basically let you set the properties of a window as it's actually being spawned in. So if we go down here, go to my window rules, as we can see, we have a couple of ones in here. Nothing too crazy, but anything with the class vimwiki, .file, or event tester, which is XEV, is always going to spawn floating. Now for these two, the way I got that to work, because when you go and run vimwiki or a .file, it doesn't actually set that to the class name of the window. I got that to work because Alacrity lets you force a new class name, and a lot of other terminals let you do this as well. But if your terminal doesn't, then you won't be able to do that. There are other ways you can get around it, but this specific thing won't actually work. I have another good use for these as well. So if I go and open up Discord, it'll always spawn on my 9th desktop, and if I open up Thunderbird, it'll always spawn on my 8th. Now, even though I have 9 desktops per screen, I usually don't use them. At most, I'll use like 5 or 6, and then the others I can leave there just for a full screen application. So if I want to ever go and check Discord, I know I can go to my 9th desktop and it will always be there. Now, the other reason why I do that is both Thunderbird and Discord have a lot of information on the screen, and don't really play nicely inside of a tiling window manager when they're spawned in a window this small. But if I do want to bring them over, because AwesomeWM doesn't really make use of desktops, I know I call them desktops a lot of the time, most of the time they act like desktops, what they really are tags. Basically, the difference is that tags can be merged together. So we can say bring everything currently on tag 9 into the tag we're currently on, but it doesn't actually go and move all those windows over. All those windows are still located inside of tag 9, and we can go and get rid of those whenever we want to. This is the same functionality that exists over in DWM, basically because AwesomeWM is a fork of that. Now, I very heavily make use of this functionality, not always for things like Discord or my email client. Sometimes I'll have something like, say, I don't know, OBS open or a file manager, and if I want to go and very easily check that, I can just go and merge these tags together whenever I need to check it. Right now you're seeing my recording screen, and there's a good reason for that. So one thing I wish I did back when I was on BSPWM was setting up some way to automate the creation of my workspace. So these 3 windows I have open here, I always have open when I'm recording a video. And because they're always open, that makes it very predictable to handle in a script. So now, regardless of which screen and which desktop I'm on, I have this little D menu script here, which lets me select either the video layout or my streaming layout. And if I go and say select my video layout, it'll jump me to tag 1 on my secondary screen and open up everything that needs to be open. So my file manager, OBS, the pulse mixer, and also my notes as well, so I can move those to where they need to be. Now, the initial plan was to handle all of this with the awful spawn function, which lets you actually set the window properties when you actually spawn the window, because for some of these, like say my file manager, I can't set a window rule for because I don't always want it on my second screen. OBS I could do, that would be fine. And for the pulse mixer, because it's inside of my terminal, I could set a custom class for it, but there had to be some way to deal with my file manager, so I had a different way to deal with it instead. As we can see, we actually are doing a little bit of stuff with the Awesome client in here. That basically lets us send function calls to the Awesome window manager outside of our config file. Pretty much all I'm doing in here is moving my cursor over to the second screen, then switching over to tag 1, and then I'm just setting the master count to 2, and then after that, all I'm doing is just spawning the windows on that desktop, which is a bit of a hack of a solution. If any windows spawn while I'm actually moving my cursor back to my main screen, it'll break, but as long as I don't touch my cursor, it's perfectly fine. This isn't supposed to be production code, it's just a hack on my system. Now, the reason why I can't just use awful.spawn, which would be a much simpler solution, is because of the way the function actually works. So as it says in the documentation here, it uses a protocol called startup notification. And not every application, like say Brave, for example, actually implements that protocol. And if the protocol isn't implemented, you can still spawn a window, you just can't set any properties as you're actually spawning it. I reckon I'm going to do a dedicated video on window spawning and on window rules because both of these functionalities are really useful for AwesomeWM, and especially in spawning, it's good to understand what the limitations actually are. One thing worth mentioning is I haven't actually bothered to touch my status bar. This is basically what you get out of the box. I'll get to it at some point, but in BSPWM, I found that I had a lot of junk in my polybar that I really never actually used, so it is kind of nice to go back to something that is very simple, that pretty much just has a system tray and my time. Before I go, I would like to say that if you're not subscribed to the channel, you're in the same group as 64% of other people, so if you are enjoying the content, hitting that button will really help out. I don't know what it does, but that's what other YouTubers say, so I think that's going to be pretty much everything for me. But before I go, I would like to thank my supporters, so a special thank you to Chris, Joachim, Donald, Michael, Andre, Nathan, David Montezar, Will, Brennan, Chico Bento, Jamie Joseph, Mitchell, Peter D, Stephen, Tony Tushar, and all of my $2 supporters. If you'd like to go support my work, the links down below to my Patreon, subscribe star, LibrePay, all that sort of stuff. I've got my podcast, Tech Over Tea, available basically anywhere, and then this channel is available on Odyssey and BitChute if you like to watch my content on a platform that isn't YouTube. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.